How does a man go from a small house in New York to a Fifth Avenue palace filled with gold, marble, and a $6,000 shower curtain? It sounds impossible, like fiction, but in America, fiction often comes true. For Dennis Kozlowski, it all began quietly, almost invisibly. A kid born in 1946 to a working-class Polish-American family. Nothing glamorous, nothing handed to him. Just grit and a belief that hard work could still build an empire. By the 1970s, he'd landed a junior accountant job at a modest manufacturing company called Tyco International. At the time, Tyco made everything from medical tubing to electrical components. The kind of company nobody outside Wall Street cared about. But Kozlowski cared deeply. He had that restless energy, the kind that keeps you up at night, planning, calculating, waiting for your break. And when the 1980s arrived, the decade of greed, mergers, and high-risk ambition, Dennis seized it with both hands. He climbed fast, too fast for some. His peers described him as relentless, hungry, charming, but terrifying when you stood in his way. By the early 1990s, that hunger had turned into something else. Obsession. Tyco began swallowing companies like a vacuum cleaner on overdrive. One acquisition, then 10, then 100. Over 1,000 companies in less than a decade. Each deal feeding the next. Each success building his legend. Wall Street didn't question it. They worshipped it. By the mid-1990s, Kozlowski was on magazine covers. The deal machine, they called him. The man who could spin debt into gold. He made Tyco's value soar from just over $1 billion to more than $100 billion. Investors cheered, analysts praised, reporters smiled, but nobody, not one of them, asked the question that really mattered. How was the machine being fueled? That question would come later. For now, Kozlowski was unstoppable. He talked fast, thought faster, and acted like the rules were written for other people. His board didn't challenge him. They couldn't. He made them too much money. Imagine it. Corporate jets waiting at dawn. Deal papers flying across tables. The flashing bulbs of photographers outside Tyco's gleaming New York headquarters. He was the image of the American dream. Tailored suits, confident grin, empire at his fingertips. But here's the thing about dreams. They can disguise nightmares. Somewhere between the spreadsheets and the billion-dollar mergers, the man who started with nothing began to believe he deserved everything. You can almost feel the turning point, the invisible moment when ambition quietly flips into greed. And if you'd asked anyone back then, 1998 maybe, if they thought Dennis Kozlowski would end up in prison, they'd have laughed. Dennis? The genius? Never. But that's how it always starts, isn't it? No one ever sees the fall until it's too late. Because power doesn't just corrupt, it seduces, it whispers, it tells you you've earned it. And for Kozlowski, that whisper became a roar. As Tyco's stock hit record highs, his lifestyle began to shift. Private jets weren't luxuries anymore. They were necessities. $1 million renovations didn't raise eyebrows, they raised prestige. In his mind, he wasn't just the CEO of Tyco. He was Tyco. But that belief, that dangerous fusion of identity and power, is the first crack in every empire. As the cameras flashed and the champagne flowed, no one noticed the small details that would one day define him. Not the contracts buried in paperwork, not the secret reimbursements, not even the receipts for things that shouldn't have been bought with company money at all. For now, the story was still about triumph. A kid from Newark had conquered Wall Street, but every empire has its tipping point, and Kozlowski's was coming fast. By the late 1990s, Tyco wasn't just growing, it was mutating. Every quarter, another acquisition. Every headline, another victory. On paper, it looked like genius, but up close, it looked more like a feeding frenzy. Imagine boardrooms filled with the smell of burnt coffee and ambition. Lawyers scribbling, phones buzzing, Kozlowski pacing, tie slightly loosened, eyes locked on the next target. "Buy it," he'd say. No hesitation, no doubt, just motion. Companies didn't merge with Tyco, they vanished into it. Medical suppliers, electronics firms, security companies, over 1,000 swallowed whole. Each new acquisition became a brick in a skyscraper so tall, even Kozlowski couldn't see the top anymore. And the higher he climbed, the thinner the air became. Tyco's market value soared past $100 billion, more than the GDP of small nations. Investors were ecstatic. The media called him a miracle worker. Magazines printed his face next to words like visionary, the Wizard of Wall Street. Every camera flash seemed to feed his confidence. Every compliment added another layer to the armor of invincibility he was building around himself. But here's the thing about applause. It's addictive. And the moment it fades, you need a louder round to feel alive again. So Kozlowski pushed harder, faster, bigger. He wasn't chasing growth anymore. He was chasing glory. Inside Tyco's gleaming offices, high above Manhattan, you could feel the pulse of something electric. Secretaries rushed down hallways, balancing coffee trays, analysts huddled around glowing monitors, phones ringing non-stop with the hum of new deals. To outsiders, it looked like the future of capitalism. Inside, it was starting to look like controlled chaos. Every merger meant new numbers to juggle, new books to reconcile, new departments to absorb. And somewhere between the spreadsheets and the celebrations, even Tyco's own executives started losing track of where the money was flowing. But Kozlowski didn't care about details. He cared about domination. He'd stride into meetings like a man who owned gravity itself, talking about synergy and scale with that trademark half-smile. His lieutenants would nod, scribble, and follow. Because questioning him wasn't just unpopular, it was dangerous. Who wants to challenge the man who'd turned a $1 billion company into a global empire? The transformation wasn't just corporate, it was personal. Dennis began dressing sharper, speaking louder, spending faster. The humility that once defined him had quietly packed its bags and left the building. The kid from Newark was gone. What remained was a king, and the kingdom was Tyco. But even kings have blind spots. Every deal, every handshake, every glowing article created an illusion that success was infinite, that Tyco was untouchable, that Dennis Kozlowski could do no wrong. And when you start believing your own legend, you stop listening to the truth. Behind those glass walls, cracks had already begun to form. Integration problems, accounting mismatches, departments that didn't quite fit together. But Kozlowski waved them off. We'll fix it later. Later never came. Still, Wall Street kept cheering. The stock kept rising. The bonuses got bigger. And Kozlowski, sitting in his corner office overlooking the city, began to believe that Tyco's growth wasn't just his success, it was his right. That's when the swagger began to show. Meetings turned into monologues. His laughter got louder. His circle of advisors grew smaller. And if someone dared to question his methods, they'd be gone by morning. Because when a man's ego grows faster than his company, something has to break. He'd built an empire made of numbers. But behind those numbers were people, rules, and realities he no longer saw. And yet, who could blame him? The world adored him. The shareholders worshipped him. The media crowned him the king of deals. But every crown comes with a cost. Because while everyone was busy celebrating the empire Dennis built, no one noticed the foundation starting to shift beneath their feet. And soon, the empire that touched the sky would learn what happens when the ground disappears. There's a saying on Wall Street, "You can't buy class." Dennis Kozlowski tried anyway. By the late 90s, the numbers at Tyco were unreal, billions flowing like water. But for Dennis, success had to look like success. He wanted the world to see it, to feel it. And that's when the man who built an empire began to build something else, a palace. It started with an apartment, not just any apartment, a Fifth Avenue masterpiece overlooking Central Park. Price tag, $30 million. Inside, it was less home, more museum. Marble floors, imported drapes, oil paintings so large they swallow the walls. But the real story wasn't the apartment. It was the renovation. $11 million. All paid for, not by Dennis, but by Tyco. Hidden under something called a decorating budget. And oh, what decor it was. A $6,000 shower curtain. A $15,000 umbrella stand, shaped like a dog. A $2,200 wastebasket. Not antiques, not art, just things. Ordinary items with extraordinary price tags. At first, it almost sounds funny, absurd. A man spends $6,000 on a piece of fabric that keeps water off the floor. But that shower curtain became a mirror, reflecting something rotten behind the luxury. Because every inch of that apartment whispered the same secret. This isn't business anymore. It's indulgence. You can picture it. The slow-motion glide of champagne poured into crystal glasses. The flash of a gold pen signing another reimbursement form. A silent chorus of assistants, too scared to ask questions. And somewhere in the background, that shower curtain swaying gently, the sound of silk and secrecy. People inside Tyco saw the spending. They saw the furniture invoices, the endless renovation bills. But who dares question a man whose name makes stock prices rise? So they stayed quiet, and the silence grew louder. There's a strange thing that happens when a person reaches the top. The world stops saying no. Every decision starts sounding brilliant. Every whim feels justified. Kozlowski didn't think he was stealing. He thought he was entitled. He'd built Tyco, hadn't he? Didn't he deserve a few perks? That's the lie power tells, that the line between earned and owed doesn't exist. From the outside, the media still saw the perfect executive. Suits tailored, speeches polished, confidence unshakable. But behind closed doors, the empire's heart was already hollowing out. What once was corporate strategy was now personal theater. Board meetings turned into showcases for his ego. Decor became identity. Every imported fabric, every handcrafted detail was another silent declaration. Look what I can make this company buy. The numbers, the deals, the ambition, all of it was now background noise to one man's private performance of success. And that's when the story stopped being about Tyco's growth and started being about Dennis Kozlowski's reflection. A reflection in polished marble floors, in diamond-studded watches, in the gold-plated fixtures of a bathroom no one else would ever use. But here's the irony. Greed rarely hides forever. It always leaves evidence. Receipts, reimbursements, emails marked confidential. One day, someone inside Tyco stumbled across the wrong expense. Just one line item too bold, one charge too large. And slowly, the curtain, that same $6,000 curtain, began to tear. Not just fabric this time, reputation. Because soon, those details, the wastebasket, the umbrella stand, the shower curtain, would stop being private indulgences and start being evidence. They'd turn into headlines, courtroom exhibits, late-night punchlines. And the same man who once stood on magazine covers would become a symbol of something darker. The arrogance that blinds, the greed that disguises itself as genius. All because one man forgot that the higher you climb, the further the fall. And the louder the crash when the silk finally rips. If the $6,000 shower curtain raised eyebrows, what came next dropped jaws. Because Dennis Kozlowski didn't just live large, he performed it. It was 2001. The world was spinning on the money high of the late 90s. Stock charts soared, CEOs were rock stars, and Tyco's empire glittered brighter than ever. So when Dennis's wife, Karen Mayo, turned 40, he didn't just plan a birthday party. He staged a spectacle. Destination: Sardinia, a sun-drenched island floating in the turquoise heart of the Mediterranean. Imagine it. A private villa overlooking the sea, waves lapping softly against the cliffs, champagne bubbling before sunset. Guests flew in on private jets, greeted with silk invitations and the scent of ocean salt mixed with wealth. The theme? Roman decadence, and Kozlowski didn't hold back. Ice sculptures of Michelangelo's David, yes, the David, stood tall in the candlelight, pouring vodka from marble-carved hands. Dancers glided through the crowd in togas of white and gold. Tables overflowed with lobster, caviar, pyramids of fruit that would have made Caesar blush. And in the center, a cake shaped like a woman's torso, sparklers bursting from it like fireworks over the Mediterranean sky. The cost? About $2 million, half of which, allegedly, came from Tyco, labeled neatly, like a magician's trick, under shareholder meeting. A shareholder meeting. The crowd laughed, drank, danced. But for the few who knew the truth, that label must have echoed in their minds, a whisper that sounded a lot like danger. And yet, who was going to say anything? Dennis Kozlowski was the king of Tyco, the man who could turn paper profits into gold. He moved through the crowd that night like a Roman emperor, glass in hand, surrounded by the empire he'd built. The ocean shimmered, torches burned, laughter swirled. Everything felt infinite. But if you looked closely, if you could freeze one frame of that night, you might have seen it. The look in his eyes. That hint of something beyond celebration. Maybe pride, maybe power, maybe denial. Because deep down, Dennis must have known this wasn't just a birthday party. It was a statement. I made it. I won. I deserve this. But when luxury becomes a performance, it's only a matter of time before someone calls cut. The footage of that party didn't stay private. Months later, when investigators started asking questions about Tyco's expenses, someone leaked a video. And there it was, the CEO of one of America's most admired companies, surrounded by half-naked dancers, champagne rivers, toga-clad executives, and a life-size David spewing vodka. It didn't look like business strategy. It looked like Caligula on vacation. When the footage hit the news, it exploded like a grenade. Late-night shows had a field day. Headlines blared, the $2 million birthday party. It became a symbol, not just of Tyco's downfall, but of an entire era's arrogance. Corporate greed suddenly had a face, and that face was laughing under the Mediterranean sun. What Dennis saw as success, the world saw as sin. Because in that moment, the story flipped. The press that once praised him turned skeptical. The shareholders who once adored him began to whisper, and the prosecutors started watching. The empire that had seemed unstoppable just months before had drawn its first crack, shaped like a champagne glass raised too high. There's a certain irony in how downfalls begin. They never start with violence or failure. or loss. They start with applause. And that night in Sardinia, with the lights, the music, the decadence, Dennis Kozlowski was still applauding himself, unaware that the curtain was already starting to close. It didn't happen overnight. The fall never does. At first, it was just whispers, quiet, careful, almost afraid. Something about the numbers, they didn't add up. For years, Tyco had been the golden child of Wall Street. The company's growth looked unstoppable, its profits immaculate, its leader unstoppable. But behind those dazzling earnings calls and glossy annual reports, something shifted. The paper trail was getting messy. Accountants began noticing patterns, bonuses that didn't match performance, expenses labeled vaguely, loans that somehow vanished before anyone could trace them. On paper, it all looked clean. Too clean. Inside Tyco's glass towers, the atmosphere changed. Once, it buzzed with confidence. Now, tension. Quiet side glances. Doors that used to stay open started to close. Some said it was paranoia. Others called it instinct. Either way, something was off. Then came the first tremor. A routine audit report, small inconsistencies. Nothing major, not yet. But when one auditor pressed deeper, more threads appeared. Expenses tucked away inside executive programs. Loans listed as forgivable. Corporate funds used for personal reasons. And not small ones. We're talking millions. Money that flowed like water through channels no one outside the inner circle could trace. But the strangest part? These loans weren't exactly hidden. They were approved, documented, sometimes even signed off by the board itself. Except, no one really understood them. How could a company this big, with auditors, accountants, and board oversight, miss it all? That's the question that would haunt Tyco forever. Part of the answer lies in the culture Kozlowski built, a culture of success at any cost. When your stock price climbs every quarter, who dares ask the hard questions? When your CEO's face is on magazine covers, when the empire seems untouchable, who wants to be the one to raise a hand and say, something's wrong? So they didn't. They smiled, they nodded, they toasted another record year, and the red flags multiplied. Behind closed doors, Dennis Kozlowski and a few trusted executives managed what would later be called the Key Employee Loan Program. It sounded harmless, even strategic, but in reality, it became a financial maze, a way to move money around, to make debts disappear, to reward loyalty quietly. Loans were issued, forgiven, restructured. Shell companies popped up like smoke, perfectly legal on the surface, perfectly confusing beneath it. It was a magician's act performed on the balance sheet, and the audience, for years, applauded without realizing the illusion. Meanwhile, whispers reached the press. A few reporters started connecting dots. Why were Tyco's executives selling shares right before quarterly reports? Why did some expenses seem to vanish from the books? Then, the knock. Investigators. A chill swept through Tyco's New York offices. Federal agents walked in with sealed folders, search warrants. Quiet authority. The hum of phones, the rhythm of deals, stopped. You could almost hear the fear. Employees watched as boxes of files were carried out. Auditors pored over ledgers like detectives at a crime scene. What once looked like flawless business now looked like a cover-up in plain sight. It was the first time people began to ask, was this empire ever real? For Kozlowski, the world that once celebrated him was turning cold. The headlines that once called him the next Jack Welch now whispered corporate fraud. But here's the thing, he still believed he could explain it. Still thought this was a misunderstanding, a smear, maybe even jealousy. In his mind, it wasn't theft. It was success, misinterpreted. Perks of performance, rewards of risk. But for the world watching, it was betrayal. And in that tension, between perception and truth, the unraveling began. What started as whispers had become a roar. The empire built on deals and image was beginning to crack under its own reflection. The empire had fallen silent. No champagne, no applause, no headlines calling him a visionary. Only cameras, flashing like gunfire outside the courthouse doors. Dennis Kozlowski, once the unstoppable CEO of Tyco International, was now reduced to a defendant in a gray suit, flanked by lawyers, walking through a tunnel of microphones and disbelief. The air was thick with irony. He'd once stood in boardrooms commanding billions. Now he stood beneath fluorescent lights, accused of stealing from the company he built. This wasn't a scandal anymore. It was a spectacle. Reporters fought for seats. Stockholders seethed in the gallery. Prosecutors sharpened their arguments like blades. And the nation, still reeling from Enron and WorldCom, was ready for blood. The first trial began in 2003, but truth, it seemed, didn't come easy. The courtroom was a theater of power and denial. Prosecutors painted Kozlowski as the ultimate symbol of corporate greed, a man who treated a public company like his personal wallet. They showed the evidence: the $6,000 shower curtain, the $2 million Sardinia party, the secret bonuses and forgiven loans, $150 million worth. Every exhibit felt like another brick in a wall of excess. But Kozlowski's defense fired back hard. They argued that none of it was secret, that the board approved everything, that he wasn't stealing, he was earning, that his success justified his rewards. And when Kozlowski took the stand, he didn't flinch. He looked straight into the cameras and said the words that would echo through every news cycle to come: "I earned it." He didn't deny the spending. He didn't show regret, just conviction. Not the legal kind, not yet, but the unshakable belief that he deserved it all. That one sentence split America in two. To some, it sounded like defiance. To others, delusion. But to everyone watching, it revealed something deeper. This wasn't about a man and his money. It was about the illusion of invincibility that power brings. The trial dragged on for months, long, brutal months. Juries argued. Reporters dissected every facial twitch. Then, chaos. A mistrial. A juror claimed harassment after being recognized in public. The whole case collapsed, and Kozlowski walked out smiling, shaking hands like a man who'd just beaten the system. But the world wasn't done with him. Not yet. In 2005, the retrial began. And this time, the tone had changed. The patience was gone. The outrage was palpable. Prosecutors told the jury, "This case isn't about business. It's about betrayal. It's about arrogance. It's about a man who thought the rules didn't apply to him." Their words hit like thunder. The evidence was the same, but the mood wasn't. The public had turned. Shareholders had lost billions, and suddenly, the man once praised for his brilliance now looked like everything that was wrong with corporate America. The verdict came on June 17, 2005. Guilty on grand larceny, conspiracy, and securities fraud. The courtroom gasped. Kozlowski blinked, just once, and then lowered his head. 8 to 25 years. The cameras caught every second. His wife in tears, his lawyer frozen, reporters shouting questions that no one dared answer. Outside, one headline captured it perfectly: "Tyco's emperor has fallen." In that moment, justice didn't feel clean. It felt tragic, because beneath the greed and arrogance, there was still a man who had once dreamed of building something great. But in chasing that greatness, he crossed a line he could no longer see. And now the world had drawn it for him. The man who once ruled boardrooms now awaited a prison bus. And as he looked out through the tinted glass of the courthouse window, he saw the reflection of what he'd become. A cautionary tale. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a fall. No headlines, no cheers, no noise. Just the sound of a door closing behind you. For Dennis Kozlowski, that sound was steel. New York State Prison, the place where a man who once commanded billions now stood in line for breakfast, wearing a number instead of a title. The walls were tall, gray, unforgiving. And inside, there was no Fifth Avenue apartment, no boardroom, no shower curtain worth $6,000. Only time. Endless, echoing time. At first, he fought it. He told himself this was temporary, that somehow the world would see what he saw, a misunderstanding, an overreaction, a fall from grace that wasn't his fault. But prison has a way of stripping you down, slowly, quietly, until there's nothing left but truth. And in those years behind bars, something began to change. The man who once signed billion-dollar deals started teaching business classes to inmates, men who'd made very different kinds of mistakes. He spoke about accounting, ethics, leadership, words that to many carried an irony too sharp to ignore. But to him, maybe it was redemption. He started helping inmates write resumes, guiding them on how to rebuild a life after release. Some said he softened. Others said he finally understood what power had blinded him to all along. That leadership without humility is just another kind of prison. Years passed, and then, one morning in 2014, the gates opened. Kozlowski stepped out. No cameras, no fanfare. Just an ordinary man, holding a small bag of belongings and a parole officer's paperwork. The man once worth hundreds of millions now had a bus pass. That moment, a billionaire trading boardrooms for a bus seat said more than any judge ever could. He went home quietly, keeping to himself. In interviews, he called himself naive, said he never thought of himself as a criminal. Maybe he believed it. Maybe that was the only way to live with it. Meanwhile, Tyco, the empire he'd built piece by piece, was gone. Sold off in fragments, merged, renamed, forgotten. Its logo vanished from skyscrapers, its stock delisted. Billions of dollars in shareholder value, gone, swallowed by the same greed that once inflated it. For the investors who trusted him, there was no redemption story, only loss. For Kozlowski, there was something worse than poverty, obscurity. No stage left to perform on, no empire left to defend. He occasionally gave talks about business ethics. Imagine that, the man who'd once symbolized excess, now warning others about it. He spoke softly, without the swagger, almost like a man who'd learned the value of silence. Some called it hypocrisy. Others saw a man trying to make peace with his past. But either way, it was too late to undo what was done. As time passed, his name faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals, fresher greed. But somewhere, in every business ethics classroom, his story still plays. The shower curtain, the birthday party, the rise, the crash. Because the world loves success stories, but it remembers the falls. In the end, Dennis Kozlowski became something he never expected. A lesson. A reminder that even at the highest floors of power, you're never more than one decision away from the bottom. And sometimes, the real punishment isn't the sentence. It's living long enough to understand it. There are stories that fade with time, and then there are stories that refuse to die. The story of Dennis Kozlowski, the man, the empire, the shower curtain, belongs to the second kind. Because that $6,000 shower curtain wasn't just an absurd purchase. It was a mirror held up to an era, to a system, a culture, a mindset that believed success meant immunity, that wealth meant worth, that because we can was the same as because we should. When people talk about Tyco now, they don't talk about the thousands of jobs, or the billion-dollar deals, or the empire that stretched across continents. They talk about that curtain, that ridiculous, fragile, shimmering symbol of excess, hanging between genius and madness. It's poetic, isn't it? That a man who built an empire could be undone by something as small, as ordinary as a shower curtain. But that's what makes it unforgettable. Because the truth is, Kozlowski didn't invent greed. He just embodied it at the perfect moment. Late 90s America, the boom years. The markets were wild. Companies were growing faster than anyone could question them. The mantra was simple: growth at all costs. And in that world, arrogance wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. Tyco wasn't alone. Boards turned a blind eye. Auditors asked fewer questions. As long as the stock price kept climbing, everyone pretended not to notice the cracks. And that's the part that should scare us the most. Because Kozlowski didn't fall alone. He fell because no one stopped him. No one asked, "Wait, why are we paying for this?" No one said, "Maybe we shouldn't call a $1 million birthday party a shareholder meeting." No one dared, because when money's flowing, accountability dries up. It wasn't just a failure of one man. It was a failure of a system built to reward short-term wins and worship those who deliver them, no matter the cost. And that's the real legacy of the shower curtain. Every business school in the world teaches it now, not because it's funny, but because it's frightening, because it shows how quickly ambition can turn into entitlement, how easily visionary can become villain. The curtain became shorthand for everything wrong with unchecked power, a literal barrier between truth and illusion, between the public face of success and the private indulgence behind it. So, could it happen again? You already know the answer. Every few years, a new name replaces Kozlowski's. Different company, same story. Different decade, same pattern. Because greed isn't an artifact of the 2000s, it's a human constant. And unless we keep questioning it, auditing it, challenging it, it will return. Every single time. But maybe, just maybe, that's why his story still matters. Not as a punchline, but as a warning. Not as history, but as a mirror. And in that reflection, you might see a little of all of us. Our fascination with success, our hunger for more, our belief that if we just win big enough, the rules don't apply. That's what Kozlowski forgot, and what the world remembered for him. In the end, he built one of the biggest companies in America and lost everything over a shower curtain. Not because of what it cost, but because of what it meant.